Imagine this, right? You have spent 18 grueling months preparing your business for sale.
And that is a long, exhausting process.
Oh, absolutely. And when I say preparing, I mean you have poured your blood, sweat, and tears into this. You've cleaned up the financials. You went out and hired a top-tier broker, and you've put together this, absolutely glowing information memorandum.
Right, you've done everything you were supposed to do.
Exactly. So looking at your numbers, you're expecting a quick deal at a premium multiple. I mean, you're practically already picturing the beach.
Naturally.
But then, within the very first 48 hours of the buyer actually looking under the hood during due diligence, they completely gut your valuation.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Welcome to a special deep dive as part of the Transfer Ready by Succession Strength podcast. Today, we are unpacking what is practically the ultimate nightmare for any successful entrepreneur.
It really is a devastating pivot, and the most alarming part is just how often it happens to genuinely smart business owners.
Yeah, people who really know what they're doing.
Exactly. To understand why this occurs, we have to fundamentally shift our perspective today. We need to stop looking at a business the way a proud seller naturally does and transition into understanding exactly how a buyer evaluates risk in those critical first 48 hours.
Which is a huge mental leap.
It is. The core thesis here is a tough pill to swallow. Buyers do not start by looking at your financials to validate your success. They start by looking at your risk profile to find your hidden fragility.
Well, let's unpack that hidden fragility, because that goes against almost everything a business owner is taught.
Right.
I mean, the standard advice is always that your financials are your ultimate report card. To really understand this disconnect, we're going to look at a specific case study today.
It's a perfect example.
Yeah, it's about a manufacturing business owner who thought he was fully 100% prepared for a lucrative exit. He went through those 18 months of prep work we just talked about.
Did all the heavy lifting.
Right. He had the clean financials, the broker, the impressive memo, and his focus was hyper-fixated on strong revenue and profit. He basically assumed everything else would just naturally take care of itself.
And honestly, you really can't blame him for thinking that way.
No, not at all.
From his perspective, sitting in the CEO chair, he was bringing a gold mine to the market. He looked at the top-line growth, he saw the healthy bottom line, and he felt totally secure in his valuation.
Because he's looking at the scoreboard.
Exactly. He was looking at the scoreboard and thinking he had already won the game.
It's kind of like, well, it's like a homeowner deciding to sell a house, right?
Yeah.
They spend a year putting on a fresh coat of premium paint, updating the kitchen fixtures, planting lush landscaping in the front yard.
Making it look perfect.
Yeah. They step back, look at the curb appeal, and think, oh, I'm going to get way over the asking price for this. But then the buyer's inspector shows up.
And the inspector does not care about the fresh paint.
Exactly. They walk right past it, go straight down into the dark, unfinished basement, and shine a flashlight on the cracked foundation.
That is exactly what happens. The buyer is always the inspector. They are looking for structural integrity, not cosmetic appeal.
Makes sense.
And in the case of our manufacturing owner, that inspection process was brutal. In just the first 2 days of diligence, we're talking the initial 48 hours, the buyer's team uncovered major structural risks the owner had completely ignored.
Okay, so wait. If they aren't immediately dazzled by the revenue, what exactly are they doing in those first 48 hours? What are the cracked walls they're shining that flashlight on?
Well, they are probing 5 specific pillars of risk.
Okay, and how do they find them so fast?
Let's look at the mechanisms of how they actually test these. The first pillar is leadership dependency. A buyer needs to know if this business can run, secure new clients, and make strategic decisions without the owner present.
Meaning they need to figure out if it's actually a self-sustaining business or just a really high-paying job for the founder.
Yes, perfectly said.
But how do they test that in 2 days? I mean, they can't just sit there and watch the team work for a month.
No, they do it through targeted interviews, not observation. On day 1, the buyer's team will pull the key managers into a room without the owner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they won't ask about daily tasks. They'll ask a strategic question. Something like, walk me through how you decided to enter your newest market, or how did you handle that recent supply chain disruption?
Okay, I see where this is going.
Right. If the managers freeze or if every answer begins with, well, the owner decided...
Then the buyer instantly knows.
Exactly. They know the leadership team is completely paralyzed without the founder. The structural integrity just fails right there.
That is incredibly revealing. You just ask a strategic question and listen to who the subject of the sentence is. If it's always the owner, you have a massive problem.
Spot on.
Okay, so what's the next structural area they test?
Customer concentration. They are looking to see if an outsized chunk of your revenue is tied to just one client, or maybe a tiny handful of clients.
Because if one phone call can wipe out half your revenue, you don't have a stable business.
You don't. You have a massive vulnerability.
And I imagine finding that is as simple as asking for an accounts receivable aging report or a list of top accounts. If customer A makes up 40% of the pie, the alarm bells go off immediately.
Oh, the data reveals it instantly. But the third pillar requires a bit more digging.
What's the third?
Operational infrastructure. Buyers need to know if your processes are actually documented and repeatable, or if the secret sauce of how your business operates lives entirely in someone's head.
Let me guess. Usually that head belongs to the owner.
Usually the owner, or maybe a legacy employee who has been there for 20 years.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you mean. The classic, we just know how to do it because we've always done it this way syndrome.
Exactly that.
But again, how does a buyer prove that in 48 hours? Do they just ask for the standard operating procedure manual?
Asking for the manual is step one, but the real test is a walkthrough of a complex process.
Like what?
The buyer might say, take your most complex product or service. Show me the pricing logic from start to finish. How do you calculate the margin? Who approves the discount? And where is the formula documented?
Oh, I see.
And if the sales director says, oh, well, the owner usually just looks at those and gives us a price based on his relationship with the vendor.
Then there's no system.
Right. The buyer knows there is no infrastructure. The process is a person.
And if the process is a person, and that person is selling the business and moving to a beach, the process is leaving the building.
Exactly.
That makes complete sense. So what's pillar 4?
Pillar 4 is financial clarity, and this goes far beyond just having money in the bank or showing a profit on your tax returns.
What does it mean then?
It means your internal financial reports, your forecasting, and your reconciliations must be investor grade. Can a third party look at your monthly close and immediately trust the numbers?
Okay, wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, because I know what some listeners are thinking right now.
Go for it.
If I have an incredibly high profit margin, like I'm making money hand over fist, the cash is physically hitting the bank account every single week, why does a buyer care if my internal processes aren't perfectly documented on paper?
That's a common question.
Or if my monthly close is a little messy, isn't the physical cash proof enough that the system works?
Well, it makes intuitive sense if you are the one currently running the operation. You view the cash flow as validation of what you have built in the past.
Right.
But a buyer is looking at that same cash flow and asking, is this guaranteed to continue into the future after you leave?
Because they aren't buying my past success, they're buying future performance.
That's the fundamental disconnect. To a buyer, an undocumented process or messy financial reporting means the current cash flow is entirely dependent on the specific individuals currently in the building.
The people heroically holding it all together.
Yes. If the knowledge is only in your head, the profit margin is tied to your physical presence. They are essentially buying a machine.
And if there's no instruction manual, they have to assume the machine might break the moment they turn it on without you.
Precisely. And the test for this during diligence is simple. They ask the controller for a trial balance or a specific reconciliation.
And if they can't do it?
If the controller panics, sweats, and says they need 3 weeks to untangle the knot, the financials are not investor grade.
Wow. Okay, so we have leadership dependency, customer concentration, operational infrastructure, and financial clarity. What is the 5th pillar they inspect?
Contingency planning. What is the exact immediate fallout if a key vendor, a key leader, or a massive client suddenly vanishes tomorrow?
Let me guess. They test this through stress testing scenarios, like what happens if your main supplier of raw materials goes bankrupt tomorrow? Where is the backup contract?
Yes. And if the answer is a blank stare, that's another cracked foundation.
It's about finding those single points of failure before the transaction closes.
Exactly.
All right, let's bring this entire framework back to our manufacturing owner who thought he was ready for a premium exit.
The guy with the fresh paint on the house.
Right. If we apply these 5 pillars and those specific 48-hour testing mechanisms to his story, we can see exactly how he failed the inspector's test in the basement.
We really can. And the reality of his situation was incredibly harsh. Remember, he thought his business was flawless due to high profitability.
But the reality was different.
Very. When the buyer's team started looking at the risk profile, the red flags were everywhere. Let's look at customer concentration first.
What did they find?
The buyer pulled the top accounts list and discovered that a single customer relationship accounted for a massive 40% of the company's total revenue.
40%. That is a huge chunk of the pie. If you lose that, you're not just taking a hit, you're laying off half your staff.
And the mechanism revealed something worse. When the buyer asked to see the long-term contracts for that whale client, there were none.
You're kidding.
I'm serious. That 40% relationship was completely undocumented. The entire dynamic lived exclusively with the owner. They golfed together, their families had dinners together.
Oh, no. So if the owner left, there was zero guarantee that 40% of the revenue wouldn't just walk out the door with him.
None whatsoever.
So he failed the customer concentration test spectacularly. What happened when they tested his leadership team? Did they do that strategic interview test you mentioned?
They did. They pulled the key managers aside and asked them how they planned the production schedule for the upcoming quarter.
Let me guess.
They froze, completely paralyzed. The buyer's interviews revealed that the team had never, not once, made a significant strategic decision without the owner holding their hand.
Wow.
They were great at taking direction, but they were incapable of steering the ship. If the owner stepped away, the company would drift.
I can see how an owner might genuinely not notice that, though. Like, if you're a strong, decisive leader, you just make the decisions. You clear the roadblocks.
Right, he feels efficient.
Exactly. You might not realize your team is paralyzed because you never actually let them move on their own. You think they're highly efficient, but really they're just compliant.
That is such a critical distinction. Compliant does not equal capable of independent leadership.
It really doesn't.
And the structural failures just continued. When the buyer tested the operational infrastructure asking about pricing logic, there was zero documentation.
Just living in his head.
Yep. The owner just knew what to charge people based on a gut feeling and historical relationships. There was no operations manual anywhere to be found.
And let me guess on the financial clarity. Those clean financials he was so proud of. When the buyer asked for the monthly reconciliation, the accounting team couldn't produce it on demand.
Not even close. Those financials actually required 3 weeks of complex manual reconciliation by the accounting team every single quarter just to make sense of them.
3 weeks?
Yes. And to a buyer, that says your financial data is inherently untrustworthy on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, 3 weeks of untangling the knot every quarter is a duct tape solution. It's definitely not an investor-grade system. So, considering all of this, the whale client, the paralyzed team, the gut-feeling pricing, the messy financials, what was the penalty? He's expecting to hand over the keys and head to a tropical island. Did they dock his valuation?
Well, because of these discoveries, and remember, all found within the first 2 days of due diligence, the buyer took swift action.
Did they walk away?
They didn't walk away, but they slashed the business's valuation by 25% right off the top.
25%.
Yeah.
That is a devastating blow.
Yeah.
If you're expecting a $10 million exit, you just lost $2.5 million of your life's work.
It was gone.
And all because you didn't write down your processes and you played too much golf with one client.
It's painful. And the financial hit was brutal, but the structural penalty was actually worse.
Worse than losing 25%.
Yeah, because to mitigate the risk of the undocumented customer and the paralyzed management team, the buyer couldn't just trust the transition. They locked the owner into a 2-year earnout.
Oh, man. So instead of a clean break in retirement, he is essentially forced to become an employee in his own company for 2 more years.
That's exactly what happened.
He has to work for the new boss, hit specific targets just to ensure the place doesn't fall apart, all to try and claw back some of the money he thought he was getting on day one.
Yeah.
That is a prison sentence for an entrepreneur.
It feels like a prison sentence, yes. But here is the most crucial insight to take away from this case study.
What's that?
None of these issues, the concentrated client, the reliant team, the messy quarterly reconciliations, none of them affected the owner's daily operations.
Because he was managing it all.
Right. The business was still turning a profit every single month, which is exactly why he didn't view them as problems.
That really makes you wonder about the psychology of the seller's blind spot.
Yeah.
Like, how can a genuinely smart entrepreneur, someone who's successfully built a highly profitable, growing manufacturing business from the ground up, be so entirely blind to these glaring massive risks?
It really all comes down to what you optimize for. Sellers spend years, sometimes decades, optimizing their business solely for growth and profitability.
That makes sense.
When you are in the trenches of building a company, your absolute priority is surviving and expanding. Over time, As hazards and inefficiencies pop up, entrepreneurs simply learn to work around them. It becomes second nature.
It's like driving a car where the alignment is completely shot.
Okay, yeah.
At first, it's really annoying. But after a few years, you just get used to holding the steering wheel slightly to the left so the car goes straight. You don't even notice you're doing it anymore. It feels perfectly normal to you.
That's a perfect analogy.
But when you go to sell that car, the buyer takes their hands off the wheel for 1 second, the car veers off the road, and they realize the whole suspension is wrecked.
That is the grim reality of the situation.
Right.
Because you naturally compensate for the misalignment, you don't feel the danger. The entrepreneur unconsciously becomes the ultimate band-aid for their own company's operational fragility. If a client is upset, the owner steps in to smooth it over.
If a quote is tricky, the owner prices it.
Exactly. They are the shock absorber. And because they absorb all the shock, the business looks incredibly smooth from the outside.
And this brings up the terrifying timeline of selling.
Hmm.
By the time a buyer actually runs due diligence, and these hidden gaps become visible to the outside world, the seller is completely out of time.
Totally out of time.
You can't just fix an alignment issue while you're driving 70 miles an hour down the highway.
You cannot. You cannot magically synthesize a competent, independent management team in a week.
No.
And you cannot instantly diversify your customer base so that your 40% whale client becomes a 10% client in the middle of a sale negotiation. It is mathematically and operationally impossible.
So when the buyer drops that inspection report on the table and points out the cracked foundation, the seller has absolutely no defense.
None. They are forced to negotiate from a position of absolute weakness.
Because the buyer holds all the cards.
Always. Leading inevitably to lower prices, terrible terms like that 2-year earnout, or very often a totally collapsed deal where the buyer just walks away entirely.
That is the danger of waiting for diligence to reveal your flaws.
Well, we need to shift the tone here to actionable hope. Because nobody wants to spend decades building a business only to get taken to the cleaners at the finish line.
Definitely not.
So if you are fundamentally blind to the risks you've learned to work around over the years, how do you see what the buyer sees before they see it?
The fundamental shift is this. You cannot guess. You must measure.
Okay.
Yes, you cannot rely on your gut feeling about how healthy your business is because your gut is calibrated to daily operations, not to a transition event.
Right. The alignment is already off.
Exactly. The solution is getting a buyer's eye view before you ever think about going to market, which means bringing in an objective measurement. It's like hiring your own brutal home inspector before you even list the house. You want them to find the cracked foundation while you still have time to pour new concrete.
That is the essential strategy. Utilizing a pre-sale readiness and risk report forces you to step outside your operational bubble.
And what does that report actually do?
It evaluates your business objectively against those exact same 5 dimensions buyers use in the first 48 hours. Leadership dependency, customer concentration, operational infrastructure, financial clarity, and contingency planning.
And doing this provides the roadmap to fix the hidden fragility without the pressure of a buyer breathing down your neck.
Exactly. Because if you know your management team is paralyzed 18 months before you want to sell, you have time to actually train them.
Right. You can step back, let them make mistakes, and let them build a track record of independent decision-making.
You have time to document the processes. You have time to diversify your client base.
You are fixing the structural issues while you still have the leverage, the privacy, and the time to do so.
Which means when the actual buyer shows up and does their 48-hour deep dive, they find a pristine foundation.
No red flags, no excuses to slash the valuation.
Right. No reason to lock you into a miserable earnout.
Right.
You secure the premium exit you actually worked for.
Seeing the risk before it costs you your valuation, that's huge.
Hmm.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a paradox to really mull over.
It's a good one.
Consider this. Are the very workarounds and scrappy hands-on habits that made you a successful entrepreneur in the first place the exact same things that are currently making your business unsellable? Visit successionstrength.com or email info@successionstrength.com to get your pre-sale readiness and risk report, and follow the Transfer Ready by Succession Strength podcast for more conversations on what it takes to prepare a business for succession or sale.